the day television stopped. It was the morning of April 26, 1999, when Britain was brought to a sudden, bewildering halt. Jill Dando, the beloved BBC presenter, the smiling face of shows like Crime Watch, Holiday, and the BBC 6 o'clock news, was gunned down outside her home in West London. She wasn't a politician, a crime boss, or a controversial figure. She was the nation's sweetheart, a woman described as the Princess Diana of television. Her murder, carried out in broad daylight on a quiet residential street, was unlike anything Britain had seen before. The country that had tuned in every week to watch her help solve crimes was suddenly plunged into a mystery of its own. Who killed Jill Dando, and why? The rise of Jill Dando. To understand the weight of Jill's murder, you need to understand who she was. Jill was born on November 9th, 1961, in Weston-super-Mare, a seaside town in Somerset, England. She grew up in a loving, modest family. Her father Jack was a printer and church warden, her mother Jean a housewife. From an early age, Jill stood out. Bright, articulate, and ambitious, she was head girl at her school and showed a natural flair for journalism. Her career began at the Western Mercury newspaper, where she quickly impressed editors with her determination and charm. By the mid-1980s, she had moved into television, first at BBC Southwest, then onto national BBC shows. By the 1990s, Jill was a household name. She presented breakfast news, co-hosted Crime Watch alongside Nick Ross, fronted Holiday, and occasionally anchored Songs of Praise. But it wasn't just her resume, it was her personality. Jill had an effortless warmth that made her trusted by millions. She could report on crime one evening and holiday destinations the next, always with the same genuine smile. Colleagues said she had no enemies, no dark secrets, nothing but goodwill in her orbit. And that's why what happened in April of 1999 stunned the nation. How could anyone want her dead? The murder. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill left her fiancé's home in Chiswick to drive to her own house in Fulham, a property she had recently put up for sale. At around 11:30 a.m, she arrived outside her home on Gowan Avenue, parked her car and walked up the short path to her front door. As she bent down to unlock it, a man approached. Witnesses later said they saw nothing unusual, no argument, no sign of struggle. In an instant, Jill was forced down onto her front step and shot in the head at point-blank range with a single bullet. A neighbour, alarmed by the sound, found her slumped against the front door. An ambulance was called, but Jill was pronounced dead shortly after arriving to hospital. She was just 37 years old. The murder was chilling not only because of its brutality, but also because of its precision. This was not a chaotic attack. It looked like an execution. Crime scene. The Metropolitan Police launched one of the largest investigations in British history, codenamed Operation Oxborough. Over 1,000 potential suspects were considered. Hundreds of hours of CCTV footage were reviewed. Forensic experts scoured the crime scene, but the evidence was strangely sparse. The bullet used was a 9mm caliber, but unusually, it had been modified. The casing had markings suggesting it may have been hand-loaded or reused, something not typically seen in gangland shootings. That alone suggested a killer with a technical knowledge of firearms. There were no signs of robbery. Jill's handbag was still with her jewelry untouched. There were no defensive wounds, no shouting heard. The attack had taken less than a minute. Whoever the gunman was, he seemed to know exactly what he was doing. The theories. Almost immediately, theories swirled. A professional hitman. The single, execution-style gunshot led many to believe Jill had been targeted by a hired killer. But who would want her dead? She wasn't political, she wasn't linked to organized crime, and she had no known enemies. Serbian revenge. Just weeks before Jill's death, NATO had bombed Serbia during the Kosovo conflict. Jill, as a prominent BBC journalist, had fronted appeals for humanitarian aid. Could Serbian paramilitaries have assassinated her as revenge against Britain's media? Intelligence services took the theory seriously, though no evidence ever surfaced. Stalker or obsessed fan. Jill's fame meant she often received fan letters, some harmless, some not. Could an obsessed admirer have turned violent? Police looked into known stalkers, but found no one with a clear motive or opportunity. Personal grudge. Investigators combed through Jill's personal life, her relationships, friendships, and professional dealings, but by all accounts, she lived a quiet, happy life with no sign of enemies. For months, the case was at a dead end. Public pressure mounted. The tabloids were relentless. The BBC itself was shaken. Their own Crime Watch program was now covering the unsolved murder of its own presenter. The arrest of Barry George. In May of 2000, over a year after the murder, police arrested Barry George, a 40-year-old man living less than half a mile from Jill's home. George had a troubled history. He suffered from learning difficulties, a personality disorder, and a record of stalking women. He was also known for creating false identities, once even pretending to be the cousin of the Queen's bodyguard. When police searched his flat, they found photographs of women, press clippings, and evidence of obsessive behavior. The crucial piece of evidence, however, was a tiny particle of gunshot residue found in his coat pocket. Prosecutors claimed this alone linked him directly to Jill's killing. At a trial in 2001, the prosecution painted George as a loner who fixated on Jill and waited for the opportunity to strike. The jury, swayed by the residue evidence and his history, convicted him. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. For a moment, it seemed the case was solved. The appeal and overturned conviction. But doubts quickly surfaced. Experts challenged the gunshot residue, arguing it could have come from the contamination at the police station or from George's known habit of hanging around firing ranges. There was no direct evidence placing him at the scene, no eyewitnesses, no CCTV, no weapon ever recovered. After multiple appeals, in 2007, the Court of Appeal quashed Barry George's conviction, declaring the forensic evidence unreliable. A retrial was held in 2008, but this time the jury acquitted him. Barry George walked free after serving 8 years in prison, still protesting his innocence. The case, once again, was wide open. A murder without justice. The acquittal left the Metropolitan Police red-faced. They had spent years and £1 million pursuing Barry George, and with his release, they had no other viable suspects. To this day, the murder of Jill Dando remains officially unsolved. Her death has had a long-lasting impact. Jill's fiancé, Alan Farthing, was devastated. Colleagues across the BBC held vigils and memorials. Every anniversary of her death is marked in the press, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because it remains a haunted, unanswered question. Who killed Jill Dando, and why? Legacy. The Dando case has become a touchstone in British criminal history. It exposed flaws in forensic science, highlighted the dangers of media pressure in murder cases, and left an enduring sense of injustice. Jill's death is often called the crime of the century in Britain, not because of the number of victims, but because of who she was, a woman whose face symbolized safety and trust, struck down in a way that felt like a direct assault on the public itself. And even now, more than 2 decades later, documentaries, books, and investigative journalists continue to revisit the case, searching for answers. But the truth remains elusive.